That night, I slept better than I had in years, that kind of deep, dreamless slumber only the mountain's absolute silence can deliver. But that peace, it didn't last. I swear the last thing I expected on my first morning of vacation was to be accused of eco-terrorism by a woman holding a clipboard and a chihuahua named Mr. Snuggles. She stormed right up my gravel driveway, eyes blazing like I had personally offended the very spirit of the mountain itself. My crime, a hummingbird feeder, one I hadn't even hung up yet. She pointed at the tree next to my old cabin, I call it the Hemlock Retreat, and hissed, "You are baiting invasive species, you know that?" I honestly thought it was a joke, some kind of weird high-altitude satire. I laughed, just a little one, and that was my biggest mistake. 10 minutes later, 3 cop cars were crawling up the slope, boxing in my pickup truck like I was a wanted cartel fugitive. That's when I knew I had to shut this charade down right then and there. I calmly walked to my truck, unlocked the lockbox, and pulled out a carefully folded set of documents that my uncle, who left me this whole place, always told me to keep close. I handed it to the first officer without saying a word. He looked at the old parchment deed, looked again, and then his eyebrows slowly rose like he was trying to decipher an ancient hieroglyph. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes confused and utterly disbelieving. "Sir," he said, his voice a little choked, this says you own over 200 acres. This entire Shadow Pine Ridge." I just nodded. Behind him, Beverly Sterling. I learned her name after she introduced herself as the interim president of the Mountain View HOA. Stood with her arms crossed, little Mr. Snuggles clamped under her elbow. Her face went white like she'd been slapped. The officer asked if I knew there were other properties built along the edge of my land. I told him I did, and I was planning on surveying the boundary lines this summer. Bev took a step back, looking like she'd been physically hit. She tried to protest, shrieking that I had forged the deed. But the second officer, who had been quietly on the dispatch call, interrupted her coldly. "Ma'am, this was registered 15 years ago. The county recorder confirms it. This is legitimate." Bev's mouth opened and closed like a trout gasping for air. I swear I thought Mr. Snuggles might actually pass out. The peace was lost after the police left. I sat on my porch, but in my head I could still hear Bev angrily screaming about the feeder. The issue wasn't birds or pets or community safety. The issue was control. She saw a guy in a flannel shirt with dirt on his boots, an outsider, and decided I didn't belong. That night I walked the property lines and noticed something strange. Fence posts were moved. Survey markers were disturbed. I found a freshly hammered sign halfway down the hill. "Private HOA property, no trespassing," and it was on my land. That's when I realized Bev wasn't just a delusional neighbor. She was staging something, laying the groundwork for a land grab or a power play with the other neighbors. If she wanted a war, I wasn't going to fight it with words or fake rules. I was going to fight it with evidence. The next morning, I drove into town and bought 2 trail cameras, a stack of private property surveillance in use signs, and a new drone. For 2 days, Bev was suspiciously silent. I knew people like her never give up. This silence was just the tension before the storm. I checked the cameras, and sure enough, the memory card had new footage. Around midnight, Bev had sneaked onto my land with a flashlight and a roll of tape. She was sticking fraudulent HOA flyers to trees and checking the camera lens, but she missed the second hidden camera. I had full-color video of her trespassing, posting fake notices, and inspecting my land like it was hers. I immediately typed up a professional, calm, legally backed cease and desist letter. I handed it to her the next morning. When I walked away, she yelled after me, "You're threatening me, intimidating a peaceful community leader." I just kept walking. Later, another police cruiser showed up. This time I was ready. I calmly recounted everything and showed him the video. The officer watched the footage of Bev sneaking around with her flashlight, slapping flyers to trees, and checking for cameras like a raccoon in a security vest. He chuckled, then nodded. He told me that while no arrest would be made yet, this was a clear case of harassment and possibly criminal trespass if it continued. But I wasn't satisfied. The police could make her pause, but I needed to completely cut off her motivation. That afternoon I went to the county office and pulled all the property boundary maps for the entire Shadow Pine Ridge, and what I found stopped me cold. Her property line wasn't just close to mine, it was over mine. A portion of her fancy deck, some 32 feet wide, including her outdoor kitchen and half of her community meeting area, had been built squarely on my land. Either the original surveyor made a mistake, or they deliberately fudged the numbers to push the property out further than legally allowed. Regardless, I had a new card to play. She had spent all this time trying to frame me as the trespasser, the threat to her community, but the entire time she was the one squatting on my land, with her folding chairs and plastic wine glasses. After discovering the encroachment, I decided not to wait for my lawyer. I needed a physical statement. So I planned a lookout tower. Nothing large or aggressive, just a simple 12-foot wooden structure on the edge of one of the upper ridges, fully legal under county law. It would give me a perfect view of the entire mountain and a perfect message to Bev: you are not invisible. Within 2 weeks, the tower's frame stood tall and proud against the skyline. Bev noticed immediately. I watched her walk Mr. Snuggles right to the edge of her lawn and stare at the tower like it was a missile launcher. She took photos, then pointed up at the structure like she was casting a spell. I said nothing, just waved from the platform, sipping my coffee and enjoying the view. It was driving her insane. The climax came when Bev held a mock county hearing. She arrived in a beige suit, oversized sunglasses, and a stack of homemade poster boards. She brought a small entourage of neighbors who had signed her fake petition. My lawyer Reese presented our case calmly and logically: ownership records, land surveys, and recent drone footage. Then came Bev's turn. She launched into a dramatic speech about community values and the spirit of the mountain. She waved her poster boards. One showed my cabin with exaggerated flames drawn around it. Another claimed my lookout tower was a spy hub. Reese leaned over and whispered, "Just let her talk. Let her dig." Finally, the presiding officer interrupted her and asked if she had any actual legal documents to support her property claim. Bev fumbled, then pulled out the same fake HOA charter she had taped to my tree. The officer scanned it, looked at her, and said, "This is not a legal document." The room went silent. Then a cough, then a snort. Bev's face flushed deep red, and she slammed the paper onto the table, accusing the entire county of conspiring against her. The hearing ended with the officer stating that the preliminary evidence clearly favored my claim. The next day I received official notice. Bev's encroachment was verified. She had two choices: begin the process of removing the encroaching deck or enter a civil negotiation to legally purchase the parcel. The next morning, she knocked on my door. She looked exhausted. She didn't come with flyers or threats, just a single piece of paper. She handed it to me and said, "I won't fight this anymore." It was an agreement to cease all HOA-related activities on the mountain. I read it, folded it, and slipped it into my back pocket. I told her she had one last thing to do. I pointed to the sign at the edge of her driveway that still read, "Mountain View HOA Headquarters." She stared at it for a long moment, then turned around, pulled it from the ground, and carried it back into her garage without another word. Weeks passed, and Bev's silence finally shifted from unnerving to a sigh of defeat. She had lost the most important things to her: control, influence, and the illusion of power. She still had one last desperate swing, though. One morning I found the camera at the base of the tower smashed and the wires torn out. More than that, the ladder had been vandalized. She had done it simply because she couldn't stand to see anything she didn't control. I filed a criminal complaint, and she was quickly fined and served with an official no-contact order. Soon after, a real estate broker called me. They said Bev was quietly selling her house, complaining that the area had become too hostile for community leadership. I smiled to myself. Not out of malice or revenge, but opportunity. A chance to write the final line. I set up a limited liability company through my lawyer, and within 2 weeks, the property was mine. The day the transfer was finalized, Bev packed her car up in the early morning and drove off without fanfare. No goodbyes, not even a glare in my direction. I watched from the lookout tower as she disappeared. Then I climbed down, walked to where her deck used to be, now my deck. I placed a small wooden sign at the corner. "Welcome." Nothing more. I didn't turn the house into a rental. I gutted it to the studs, threw open the windows, and let the mountain back inside. I renovated it into a simple space, with bunk beds, wood-burning stoves, and shelves lined with hiking guides. I called it the Lookout Lodge, a place where veterans, hikers, and volunteers could stay and reconnect with the wilderness free of charge. And as Bev vanished, the old neighbors finally started to breathe. They told me stories of years of bullying and manipulation. A real community bloomed, the kind that comes without dues, threats, or poster board politics. Just people looking out for one another. As the sun dipped low behind the ridge, I stood on my rebuilt tower platform, breathing the cold, clean air. This mountain had tested me. It had given me chaos and a neighbor who saw herself as the queen of the ridge. But it had also given me something more lasting. Purpose, patience, a reminder that power doesn't come from rules scrawled on flyers or shouted in backyards. It comes from knowing where you stand and refusing to be pushed. I smiled and whispered to the valley below, "This is home. Not because I bought it, not because I fought for it, but because I earned it." Have you ever dealt with an HOA, Kerren, or a manipulative neighbor like Beverly? What happened? Who won? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your stories of justice. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of sweet revenge and crazy neighbors.